The first thing Maribel noticed was that the orchard had stopped sounding like an orchard. No birds in the pear rows, no irrigation tick against the aluminum risers. No soft scrape of branches in the wind, just the deep, coughing reverse alarm of a heavy truck. It was 5:12 on a wet April morning in 1994, and a dump truck from Pine Crown Aggregates was backing through the gate of her North Run orchard, raising its bed over the best pear ground in Willow Creek Valley. By the time Mara reached the lower road, the truck had already opened its tailgate. A gray stream poured out behind it. Not soil, not compost, not lime. Quarry screenings, basalt dust, crushed stone, broken fines, and damp mineral grit spreading in a dirty ribbon across the spring grass beneath 72-year-old pear trees. Mara was 68 years old, 5'3" in her barn coat, with gray hair tucked into a blue scarf and mud up the sides of her boots. She had lived on that orchard since she was 9, her husband had died there, her father had planted the first Anjou row by hand, her son had left for Portland and never understood why anyone would stay. But Mara stayed because the trees told the truth. And that morning, Pine Crown Aggregates had covered the truth in gray waste. She walked directly in front of the truck. The driver braked so hard, the whole bed slammed. He climbed out with a clipboard, and the look of a man who had been sent somewhere wrong, but did not yet know how wrong. Mara said, "Who told you to dump that here?" The driver turned the order around. Temporary mineral disposal. Parcel 17B. North Run access. Approved by Quentin Sloan, operations manager. The coordinates were hers. Mara read every line, then looked past the truck at the damage. The strip was already 200 feet long, 6 feet wide, and thick enough to bury the young cover crop she had seeded 2 weeks earlier. She handed the clipboard back and said, "You're done for the day." The driver said, "Ma'am, I've got 4 more loads scheduled." Mara said, "Then you've got 4 more loads that won't cross this gate." At 7:40 that morning, she was standing in the front office of Pine Crown Aggregates with dried gray dust on her boots and the order sheet in her hand. Quentin Sloan came out after making her wait 31 minutes. He was 45, clean-shaved, pressed shirt, expensive watch. The kind of man who looked at a farm woman and saw a complaint before he saw a person. Mara explained the mistake. She used short sentences. She said his company had dumped quarry waste on her orchard, without permission, without a lease, without notice, and without any right to be there. Sloan listened for maybe half of it. Then, he smiled. He said, "Mrs. Bell, we move more material in a week than your orchard moves in a year. If one dispatch sheet had a coordinate error, our legal department will sort it out." Mara said, "The North Run block is my strongest ground." Sloan looked at the gray dust on her boots. He said, "Then maybe it needed a little drainage." Mara did not. She said, "That ground grows pears." Sloan said, "Not where we dumped it." Then he turned back toward his office and added, "Take the settlement when it comes. You'll be happier." That was the sentence Mara remembered, not the laughter, not the mistake. Take the settlement, as if the orchard was already dead, and all that remained was pricing the body. By noon, 3 neighbors had heard. By nightfall, half the valley knew Pine Crown had buried part of Maribel's best block under quarry waste. Most of them said the same thing in softer words. "We should take the money." Crusher fines were not topsoil. Basalt screenings packed hard when wet and crusted when dry. They smothered feeder roots, changed water movement and made spring ground behave like a roadbed. Young roots could not breathe under that kind of layer. Pear trees hated sudden changes around the crown. If the material stayed too long, the trees might stress, split fruit, or start declining from the roots up. An orchardist named Glenn Markham stopped at the gate 2 days later and looked over the damaged strip. He ran 600 acres with new sprayers, consultants, leaf tissue tests, and a bank line bigger than Mara's entire farm. He said, "I'm sorry, Mara is finished." Mara said, "Is it?" Glenn looked at her carefully, as if kindness required patience. He said, "You can scrape it, maybe. Replace soil, maybe. But you'll cut roots doing it. You'll lose the row either way." Mara looked at the gray material lying between the trunks. Glenn said, "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Mara said, "I'm not." But what no one in Willow Creek Valley knew was that Mara had been trained for this problem before anyone knew it was a problem. Not in college, not in a lab. In a shed behind her father's packing barn in 1951. During a winter when the river froze and trucks could not reach the valley for 9 days. Eli Calder had been a quiet orchardist with a crippled left hand and a habit of saving things everyone else threw away. Broken tile, bone meal sacks, burned wood ash, rock powder from the county road crew. He taught Mara to graft before he taught her to drive. He used to say, "A tree eats slowly. If you want to feed it fast, you're already late." During that frozen winter, he showed her something he had kept in coffee tins. Dust from the Quarry Ridge, silt from the creek bend, powder from old mortar. He would pinch it between his fingers and make her smell it, then name what it was likely to do in wet soil. "Rock is not dead," he told her. "Rock is storage. Just have to open the door small enough for roots and water to enter." Mara had remembered the words as a daughter remembers a father. Tenderly, but not urgently. Until Pine Crown dumped the mountain into her orchard. The 3 days, Mara did not call the newspaper. She did not stand in front of a camera. She did not put a sign on the road. She walked the North Run block with a shovel, a mason jar, and a pocket knife. She separated the gray material from the orchard soil. She broke pieces in her hand. She soaked samples overnight and rubbed the slurry between her fingers. She watched how fast water disappeared. She smelled for sulfur, sheen. She scraped roots lightly and marked the trees that were most stressed. Then she drove 40 miles to the county extension office and asked questions that made the young agent stop typing. What formation did Pine Crown quarry? Was the screening material washed? Had there been blasting residue in the batch? What was the typical potassium content of the basalt? What was the pH? How fine was fine enough before mineral release mattered? The agent did not have all the answers. So Mara went to the public library, then to a retired soil mineralogist named Dr. Arthur Nemec, who lived above a hardware store and still answered the door with a pencil behind his ear. He studied the jar of gray screenings on his kitchen table. He said, "Most people would call this a mess." Mara said, "And you?" He pinched a little between 2 fingers. He said, "I would call it locked food." The basalt was not clean enough to throw around carelessly. It was too coarse, too heavy, too compacting. Spread the wrong way, it would damage the orchard. Left in a layer, it would behave like pavement. But the mineral profile was useful. Potassium, calcium, magnesium, iron, silica, trace elements. Nothing magic. Nothing instant. Kind of slow mineral supply volcanic soils had been giving orchards for thousands of years. Nemec said, if you can make it fine, keep it biologically active, and stop it from sealing the surface, the trees might use it. Mara asked, how long? He said, longer than patience, shorter than despair. That was enough. Pine Crown's first letter arrived a week later. It acknowledged an unauthorized delivery and offered Mara $2,400 for temporary nuisance and lost ground access. Temporary nuisance and lost ground access. Temporary nuisance. Mara placed the letter on the kitchen table, set a coffee mug on the corner to keep it flat, and went back outside. The work began ugly. She bought an old rotary screen from a cannery auction, repaired it with baling wire, and mounted it behind her 1948 Case VAC tractor. The tractor was small, orange, dented, and older than most of the men who called it useless. She had kept it because it started in cold weather and did not complain. She screened the dumped material by hand-fed batches, removing the larger shards. She ran the finer fraction through a cracked feed grinder she borrowed from a retired dairy farmer. She mixed the powder with leaf mold, rotted pear pulp, horse manure, and chipped prunings from her own winter cuts. Not once. Again and again. A little mineral. A lot of organic matter. Moisture. Air. Time. She did not try to erase what had happened. She tried to digest it. In the first season, the damaged rows looked worse. The cover crop came up thin. The leaves on 12 trees yellowed around the veins. 2 young replacements dropped their fruitlets before June. People slowed down when they passed her gate, but fewer stopped. That summer, Glenn Markham came by again and watched Mara kneel between the rows, lifting a handful of gray-brown composted grit from the surface. He said, "You're working too hard to save something that doesn't want saving." Mara said, "Trees always want saving. They just don't always want it on our schedule." He said, "You think rock dust is going to fix root damage?" Mara looked up. "No," she said. "Biology fixes root damage. The dust is just what the biology is eating." Glenn shook his head. He was not cruel. He was certain. And certainty is often more dangerous than cruelty, because it sounds responsible while it closes every door. By autumn, Mara had spent almost all the small settlement money her lawyer forced out of Pine Crown after threatening a trespass claim. She had bought nothing that looked impressive. No new tractor, no contractor, no professional crew. Just a soil thermometer, lab tests, sacks of cover crop seed, and more composted material than her back wanted to carry. Daughter Lila drove down from Seattle in November, and found Mara washing gray mud out of her sleeves at the sink. Lila said, "Mom, you don't have to prove anything to those people." Mara said, "That isn't what I'm proving." "Then what is it?" Mara looked out the kitchen window toward the North Run rows. She said, "I'm trying to find out whether they dumped waste on my land, or delivered the one thing it was missing." Lila did not know what to say to that. The second spring changed nothing from the road. That was the hardest part. From the road, the damaged strip still looked dull. The grass was uneven. The soil color was wrong. The trees had not regained their full canopy. Driving past, could say Mara was losing the argument. But under the surface, the numbers were moving. Soil pH stabilized. Water infiltration improved. Exchangeable potassium climbed without the harsh spike of soluble fertilizer. Organic matter, still low, began rising. Earthworms returned to the first 20 feet of the strip. Fine roots appeared inside the amended layer, instead of stopping above it. Mara logged everything in a spiral notebook with a cracked green cover. Date, moisture, temperature, leaf color, fruit set, soil smell, worm count, lab value, tree response. She trusted the notebook more than any compliment. Season, she let the damaged strip carry a limited crop, not a full load. She was not reckless. She thinned hard in June, left fewer pears than the trees wanted, and waited. By late August, the fruit in the amended rows was not larger than the rest. It was denser. The skins had a cleaner finish. The stems held better. The trees stayed green longer after the first heat wave. A packing house test showed higher sugars and firmer flesh from the strip everyone had called ruined. Mara read the number twice. Then she closed the envelope and kept picking. The fourth season was the one that made the valley stop talking softly. The North Run damage strip came in 29% above its previous 10-year average by marketable weight. Not total fruit. Marketable fruit. Fruit that packed, held, shipped, and paid. The rest of the orchard had a good year. The buried strip had a better one. Glenn Markham heard the number at the co-op and drove to Mara's place before supper. This time,
He did not stand at the gate. He walked the rows with her. He looked at the trunks. He dug a shallow slice with his pocket knife, and watched the soil crumble instead of smear. He read the lab sheets at her kitchen table, and stopped twice to go back to an earlier page. Finally he said, "I told you this block was finished." Mara poured coffee. "Yes," she said. Glenn said, "I was wrong." Mara did not rescue him from the sentence. After a while, he asked, "How did you know?" Mara looked at the notebook, then out at the orchard. "I didn't know," she said. "I knew what to test." That answer traveled farther than the yield number. By winter, the Extension Office asked to publish her records as a case study in mineral amendment and orchard recovery. Mara did not care about being written up, but she cared very much that no one could later call the results a rumor. So she gave them the data. The paper was small, practical, and boring in the way useful things often are. It said a privately owned pear orchard in Willow Creek Valley had recovered from an unauthorized application of basalt quarry screenings through screened mineral amendment, high-carbon organic blending, cover crop cycling, and multi-season root zone management. It did not mention Quentin Sloan. But Quentin Sloan read it. By then, Pine Crown Aggregates had a new problem. The state had tightened disposal rules on quarry fines. Stockpiles were growing, hauling costs were rising. Landfill fees made everyone at the company angry, and one engineer had suggested that properly processed basalt fines might qualify for agricultural reuse if the company could prove consistency, application safety, and measurable benefit. Sloan had dismissed it in a meeting. He said, "Farmers don't want our dust." Then the engineer placed Mara Bell's extension case study on his desk. Sloan drove to the orchard on a clear Thursday morning in February. He parked carefully this time. Mara met him at the packing shed. She looked at his clean boots, then at his face. He held the case study in one hand. He said, "Mrs. Bell, I owe you an apology." Mara waited. He said, "I treated you like a nuisance, because I thought I understood the material and you didn't. I was wrong about both." That was the first useful thing he had said to her in 4 years. Mara nodded once. Sloan said, "I'd like to understand your process." She said, "For your orchard?" He looked down. "For my stockpiles." There it was. Not guilt, not kindness. Need. Mara could have closed the shed door. Instead, she opened her notebook. For 2 hours, she explained what she had done and what she had refused to do. No raw dumping. No coarse layer. No wet compaction. No sales language calling dust a cure. Screened material only. Particle size controls. Soil testing first. Organic blending, mandatory. Application rates conservative. Multi-year records. Tree response over wishful thinking. Sloan wrote it all down. When he asked whether Pine Crown could use her data, Mara said no. Then she slid a second folder across the table. Inside was a proposal she had mailed to the Extension Office 3 months earlier. A monitored reuse program. Farmer-controlled specifications. Independent testing. Pine Crown would process and deliver screened basalt fines at no cost to participating orchards. The Extension Office would document results, and Mara would be paid as the field advisor. Not as a mascot. Not as a testimonial. The woman whose land they once damaged. Sloan read the first page. He said, "You prepared this." Mara said, "I had 4 years. The program started small. 5 orchards the first year, 12 the next. Nobody was allowed to call it miracle dust." Mara corrected that phrase every time she heard it. "It is not a miracle," she would say. "It is minerals, carbon, water, roots, and time. If you leave one out, you just have expensive gray dirt." Pine Crown saved money on disposal. The Extension Office collected better data than anyone expected.
Several orchards improved poor blocks that had been lined and fertilized for years without ever quite waking up. And Mara kept farming. She did not expand. She did not put her face on bags. She did not give speeches unless someone asked a real question and waited for the answer.
38 case tractor stayed in the equipment shed, still dented, still stubborn, still starting on cold mornings when newer machines needed charging cables and prayers. In 2001, 7 years after the truck first backed through her gate, Mara walked the North Run block at dusk. The pears were already picked. The leaves had begun turning bronze at the edges. The soil under the trees was dark now. Not black exactly. Not gray, but alive in the complicated color of ground that has been injured and rebuilt. She stopped at the place where the first load had fallen. For years, people had told the story as if the quarry had tried to ruin her orchard, and she had somehow beaten the quarry. That was not how Mara understood it. The quarry had only made the mistake loud enough for everyone to hear. The real story was quieter. A woman knew that waste is sometimes just a material nobody understands yet. She knew that old knowledge is not old because it stopped working. It is old because it has survived long enough to be tested by people who arrive late and call themselves modern. She bent down, took a handful of soil, and let it fall through her fingers. Then she closed the gate for the night. The mountain had come to her orchard as an insult, answered it as a farmer. And the trees, slow as ever, had spent 7 years proving she had understood the question.